The soundless voice. We talk about listening for God with our souls, not our minds. The mind is random thoughts, the soul is deeper, it is the fire behind the actions born of a wide range of emotional reactions. These reactions generate action potentials that are transmitted along miles of nerve tissue connecting the brain to the body, the fire of life that drives the biological soul generator, or at least the illusion of a soul. What if I told you that God isn't found in prayer, but in the absolute absence of sound? Most seekers spend their lives searching outward, through ritual, through words, through systems designed to point them toward something beyond themselves. They fill the silence with intention, with repetition, with movement. And in doing so, they assume they are getting closer. But what if all of that activity is the barrier? What if the constant noise, external and internal, is not the path to the divine, but the mechanism that keeps it hidden? Silence is not empty. It is not passive. It is not a neutral space waiting to be filled. Silence is a condition. A pressure. A field that reveals rather than conceals. And most people never remain in it long enough to understand what it does. Because when the noise stops, when the distractions fall away, what emerges first is not clarity. It is a confrontation. You begin to encounter the structure of your own mind without interruption. The restless movement of thought. The compulsive need to generate input. The inability to remain still without reaching for something, anything, to fill the space. This is the first threshold. The ancient Hermeticists understood this dynamic with a level of precision that modern seekers rarely approach. They did not romanticize silence. They did not treat it as comfort. They treated it as a tool, one that dismantles the superficial layers of perception. They pointed toward something deeper, something far less accessible through ordinary means. They called it the monad. Not a god in the conventional sense. Not a figure, not a personality, not an external authority. The monad is the indivisible source. The underlying unity from which all structure emerges. And within it, there is no language. No words. No symbols. No images. Only pattern. Only order. This is where the misunderstanding begins. Because most people approach the idea of the divine expecting communication, expecting something that can be heard, interpreted, translated into thought. They want a voice. A message. A sign that confirms they are being guided. But the deeper structures of reality do not communicate in that way. They do not speak. They organize. To access that level, the mind has to undergo a shift. Not in belief, not in ideology, but in function. And that shift requires removing noise. Not just external noise, but internal noise, the constant narration, the looping thoughts, the reflexive interpretations that overlay everything we experience. When those begin to quiet, not briefly, not superficially, but completely, something else becomes detectable. Not as a sound. As a presence of structure. This is what the Hermetic tradition refers to as the logos. But not in the simplified sense of word or speech. The logos, at its core, is order. The underlying framework that gives coherence to reality itself. It does not tell you anything. It changes how you perceive. And that change does not happen through effort in the way most people understand it. It happens through exposure, through sustained contact with silence that is not broken the moment it becomes uncomfortable. Because silence, when extended beyond what feels manageable, becomes something else entirely. It gains weight. It begins to compress the mind, forcing it to confront its own instability. Every distraction you rely on becomes more obvious. Every avoidance pattern becomes more visible. This is where most people disengage. They interpret the discomfort as failure, as emptiness, as a lack of progress. But within the Hermetic framework, this is precisely where the process begins. Because what you are experiencing is not absence. It is the removal of interference. And once interference is reduced enough, something fundamental starts to reorganize. Not through conscious control. Through alignment. The mind, stripped of its constant output, begins to reflect deeper patterns. Not perfectly, not immediately, but gradually. Subtly, you start to notice that thoughts no longer dominate in the same way. That perception becomes less reactive. That there is a space, small at first, between stimulus and response. This is not the end state. It is the beginning of reconfiguration. The Hermeticists described this in terms of alchemy, not as a physical transformation, but as an internal one. The transmutation of consciousness from a fragmented, reactive state into something more unified. But this is where precision matters. Because this is not mystical in the way it is often presented. There are no visions required. No symbolic revelations. No external confirmations. Only the structure becomes visible as the distortion falls away. And that visibility depends entirely on your ability to remain in silence without escaping it. Which is far more difficult than it sounds. Because the mind does not want to be still. It is conditioned to move, to interpret, to generate meaning constantly. Silence interrupts that process. It removes the feedback loops that keep thought active. And without those loops, the system begins to destabilize. This is why silence feels heavy. Why it can feel disorienting, even threatening. Because it removes the mechanisms that define your normal state of awareness. But if you remain, if you resist the impulse to fill the space, something else stabilizes in its place. A different mode of perception. One that is not driven by constant output, but by direct awareness of structure. This is the point where the concept of the soundless voice becomes relevant. It is not a voice in any literal sense. It is the recognition of order without language. A form of understanding that does not pass through words before it becomes known. And once you begin to detect that, even faintly, the entire orientation of your perception starts to shift. You stop looking outward for confirmation. You stop expecting answers to arrive in recognizable forms. Because you begin to understand that what you are accessing does not operate within those constraints. The void, in this framework, is not an absence. It is the most concentrated form of this process. It removes everything that can be removed. It leaves no distraction, no interference, no external reference point. And in doing so, it forces the system, your mind, your perception, to either fragment or align. There is no middle state. Which is why it has always been described as both dangerous and transformative. Not because it harms you, but because it removes everything you rely on to maintain your current structure. And without that structure, something new has to form. Whether that formation is coherent or chaotic depends on your ability to remain present within the silence long enough for alignment to occur. This is why the instruction is simple, but not easy. Stop looking for signs. Stop expecting guidance in the form of language. Stop filling the space the moment it becomes uncomfortable. Because if there is something to be encountered at the deepest level, it does not arrive through noise. It does not announce itself. It does not adapt to your expectations. It is already there. But it exists beneath the constant activity that defines your normal experience. And the only way to access it is to remove that activity without replacing it. To sit in silence long enough for it to stop feeling like emptiness and start revealing structure. Most will not do this. Most will retreat the moment the silence becomes heavy. But for those who remain, who allow the process to unfold without interruption, the result is not information. It is a transformation. Not into something new, but into something more aligned with what was always there. The underlying order. The pattern beneath thought. The signal that does not speak. To hear it, you must first endure what most avoid. The full, unbroken weight of silence.